What if the part of you that appears strongest is actually the one most deeply fractured? Nietzsche didn't just explore suffering, he exposed the subtle games we play to avoid facing ourselves. And the first disguise is pretending you're fine. You pretend not because you truly are, but because people wouldn't know what to do if you weren't. You say, I'm fine, so quickly it barely registers as false. You keep showing up, finish what needs to be done, smile and cue, and never let the fatigue show in your tone. And that became your role, the dependable one, the unshakable one, the one who keeps smiling even while breaking. But Nietzsche would say that's the exact danger. Because someone who forgets how to unravel also forgets what it means to be fully alive. Here's a truth rarely spoken. Pretending is less painful than explaining. It takes less out of you to say, I'm okay, than to unpack what's truly stirring inside. It's easier to fake a laugh than to confess you feel detached from everything. It's safer to act normal than to face the rejection that often trails behind honesty. So you don't just lie to others, you lie to yourself. And that's what Nietzsche feared, not agony, but avoidance. He believed the longer we run from our truth, the more power it gains over us. And the one who hides their wounds too well eventually becomes foreign to themselves. It began subtly. Maybe someone told you to toughen up early on. Maybe tears made people uneasy. Maybe asking for support got you labeled dramatic. So you stopped. You adjusted, you learned how to internalize. And now you joke when anxious, distract yourself when down. Make sure everyone else is okay so no one asks how you are. It's not your fault. It's the only way you knew how to survive. But Nietzsche would argue what helped you survive then might be what's keeping you lost now. Because when pain goes too long unnamed, it begins to name you. The hardest part is when people admire your strength, but never see the burden behind it. They say, you're so strong, you always manage. You're so calm. But behind that calm is someone who hasn't cried in weeks, not because you didn't need to, but because you forgot how. And Nietzsche would call this spiritual numbness, not peace, but absence. A kind of detachment that looks like wisdom, but beneath it is unspoken suffering. The longer you wear the mask, the more your pain disappears, not only from view, but from your awareness. You stop getting excited. Laughter feels distant. You go through the motions, but feel half present, like you're watching your life instead of being in it. And when someone asks, are you okay? Your answer comes out too quickly, too smoothly, because deep down, if you pause even a second, it might all spill out. Nietzsche believed those who suffer in silence are often the ones who've learned to suffer well. But every skill has a cost. Your body holds the stress. Your mind holds the memories. And your soul fades to the background, waiting for a moment when it feels safe to return. Here's the terrifying part. You can become so skilled at pretending that even you forget you're doing it. You confuse coping for healing. You confuse being busy with having purpose. You confuse feeling fine with actually being alive. And Nietzsche would say that's when the soul begins to rot, not because you're fragile, but because performing requires you to abandon the rawest parts of yourself. You become a mirror of what others want to see, a version of you that appears competent, charming, reliable, but no longer authentic. And when authenticity disappears, so does meaning. Sometimes it looks like burnout, sometimes like indifference. Sometimes it just feels like you don't care anymore, but you go. You've only buried yourself so deep beneath the act, you can't remember how to come up for breath. And this is what Nietzsche meant when he said, man is the cruelest animal. Not because of how we treat others, but because of how we deny ourselves. We numb our grief. We silence our feelings. We call it strength. But true strength is sitting with your truth and still showing up, not disguising it, not performing through it, but carrying it honestly. You weren't built to bear everything alone. You weren't built to wear this many disguises just to feel acceptable. And if there's a quiet voice you keep ignoring, that voice isn't weakness. It's not drama. It's your real self asking to return. Nietzsche saw the highest strength, not in endurance, but in self-awareness. Because once you see yourself without the mask, you can never go back to living in the dark. But clarity comes at a cost. It breaks the shell you've tried so hard to maintain. And once that break appears, you start to understand you were never meant to carry this weight alone. The world assumes you're fine because you trained it to. But Nietzsche believed when silence lingers too long, the soul begins to decay from within. You didn't choose to be the strong one. It happened quietly, in rooms where no one asked how you felt. In spaces where you carried others so they wouldn't fall. In moments where you silenced your hurt because they seemed louder. So you learned, don't ask, don't express, just keep going. And slowly strength became your entire identity, not joy, not feeling, not presence, just survival. But Nietzsche warned that survival isn't noble when it becomes your only way to exist. Because when you hold it together too long, you start believing falling apart isn't an option. You've tried to open up before. You left breadcrumbs. You hinted. You hoped someone would pick up on the shift in your voice or the drop in your energy. But they didn't. They heard the words, not the meaning. They gave advice instead of presence. And so you stopped reaching. Now you've mastered quiet detachment. You engaged just enough to stay unnoticed, but inside you're vanishing, and no one sees it. Nietzsche would call this a societal illusion, a culture where we speak constantly but never truly witness each other. And what most people miss is this: the ones who cry easily aren't always the weakest. And the ones who appear fine aren't always alright. Sometimes, the one who seems most stable is the one who's bleeding in silence. You've given more than you had. Stood steady in other people's storms while your own life cracked. And now you're weary in a way rest can't reach. It's not sleep you crave. It's connection. It's peace. And Nietzsche would say that what drains you isn't weakness. It's the emotional robbery of always being everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. Sometimes you want to vanish. Not permanently. Not dramatically. Just long enough to reset. To feel without guilt. To weep without explanation. To sit in your thoughts without solving someone else's. But then guilt comes back. Because you were taught your worth lies in what you provide. That resting is lazy. That space is cold. That no means you're letting someone down. But Nietzsche saw withdrawal not as failure, but as wisdom. Because when the world depletes you, pulling back is an act of self-respect. You don't owe anyone justification for needing quiet. You don't need to apologize for choosing your own peace. You're allowed to disappoint people who only loved you when you were useful. The disturbing thing about emotional pain is how quiet it grows. At first it screams, then it whispers. Then it just stays, a low throb that trails behind you like a shadow. You stop feeling joy. Stop reaching out. Stop believing change is possible. But Nietzsche would tell you this numbness isn't your end. It's your signal. Something in you is done being ignored. And if you listen even a little, that numbness becomes a map, guiding you back to what matters. There's a dangerous myth that says, if I were stronger, I wouldn't feel this way. But Nietzsche believed the opposite. He saw emotional honesty as the greatest bravery. You don't need to be unbreakable. You need to be human. You don't need to cover your scars. You need to remember they still make you whole. You don't need a rescuer. You need to rescue the part of you that stopped believing it deserved saving. You dilute your feelings. Rephrase your truth. Say, it's not a big deal, even when it's breaking you. And the more you do, the less you recognize yourself. Nietzsche called that self-betrayal. Not because you lied to others, but because you gave up your truth for people who wouldn't protect it. Every time you suppress a need, every time you stay silent to keep peace, every time you ignore your signals just to keep showing up, another piece of you gets buried. And the longer that goes on, the harder it becomes to remember what it felt like to be whole. What if your pain isn't weakness, but a message? What if it's your mind, your heart, your body trying to guide you home? Nietzsche never said life should be painless. He said it should be truthful. He believed pain is the price of becoming who you are, because only when you stop numbing can you start to understand what the pain is trying to tell you, that the roles you're playing no longer fit, that the act you're maintaining isn't your real life, and that's not failure. That's a doorway to freedom. But to walk through it, you have to do the thing you've resisted. Let the mask fall. And if you're beginning to feel that internal shift, that soft ache whispering, I can't keep doing this, then you're already closer than you think. Because what follows the end of pretending isn't destruction, it's awakening. But awakening doesn't arrive with clarity. It begins with collapse. When the mask slips, something else rises. Not chaos, not weakness, but a kind of awareness Nietzsche believed could only emerge through the fall. You've spent years holding everything together, but suppressing it all doesn't make you stronger. It makes you vanish, and the truth is your breakdown isn't your enemy. It's your breakthrough, fighting to be heard through the noise. Nietzsche believed the true self doesn't surface in comfort. It rises in conflict. It's found by confronting what you've been avoiding, by sitting in the stillness long enough to hear the truth beneath the distractions. And maybe that's where you are now, on the verge of something real. Most people avoid collapse because they mistake it for failure. They fear the moment they can't keep pretending. They fear crying and not being able to stop. They fear waking up and realizing they no longer want the life they built. But Nietzsche didn't fear collapse. He feared comfort without honesty. He believed real change begins the moment the false self can no longer carry the narrative. Because collapse doesn't destroy you, it removes everything that never belonged. The people who didn't see you. The expectations you couldn't fulfill. The pain you carried to feel needed. All of it crumbles. And what remains? Not the polished version of you, the true one. The one who still feels, still hopes, still carries something sacred beneath all the pretending. There's a difference between holding it together and being held. One exhausts you, the other heals. But you've existed in survival for so long that even peace feels suspicious. Stillness feels lazy. Rest feels undeserved. Because your whole identity was shaped around endurance. And now, without the chaos, you're not sure who you are. But Nietzsche believed the path back to the self isn't loud. It's not dramatic, it's quiet. It begins in those silent moments where you sit with your pain and don't run. Where you stop fixing and just let things be broken. Where you stop editing yourself to feel accepted. And in that space, your real self emerges, not the version you built for approval, the one built for truth. Beneath the tired version of you is the one who still dreams. The one who wanted more. The one who believed love should feel safe. That friendship should feel mutual. That emotion shouldn't be punished. That life should feel alive. Nietzsche said, become who you are. It sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing anyone can do. Because it means shedding every layer built from fear. It means letting down those who only loved the mask. It means mourning the version of you who always said yes, always showed up, always gave first. And choosing a new direction, one rooted not in survival, but in sovereignty. If anyone ever told you that you're too emotional, too intense, too deep, too much, understand that isn't a flaw. It's misalignment. Nietzsche didn't believe in shrinking to fit dim spaces. He believed that truth, when fully lived, would offend those still addicted to illusion. So, if you felt unseen, misunderstood, like no one gets you, maybe they weren't supposed to. Maybe you weren't made to be digestible. Maybe your emotions aren't a burden. They're evidence that you still care. That you still feel. That you're still awake even in a sleepwalking world. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you're so drained is because you've been shining in places that only welcomed your shadow. It's strange how everything changes when you stop pretending. You start hearing your own thoughts again. You notice who disappears when you set a boundary. You see how much of your life was built to be liked, not to be free. And Nietzsche would say that's where liberation begins. Not in defiance, but in discovery. You stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I want for myself? Not out of ego, but out of truth. You don't need to be flawless. You don't need to impress. You don't need to be loved by everyone. You just need to stop abandoning yourself to be accepted. Because the moment you choose yourself, you no longer need saving. It's easy to believe you're lost. But more often than not, you've just been hiding. Because life convinced you it wasn't safe to be real. That people only stay if you're easy. That love is earned by suffering in silence. But Nietzsche believed the self doesn't need to be invented. It needs to be uncovered. And the first time you're finding your way back to yourself, you stop apologizing for your depth. You stop laughing at what isn't funny. You stop waiting for permission to feel whole. You stop saying you're okay when you're not, and start telling the truth. If this reached you, it wasn't by accident. Maybe no one told you this before. You're not too far gone. You're not too much. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're tired. You're honest. You're feeling what others won't admit. And that makes you powerful. Nietzsche didn't want you to be fearless. He wanted you to be real. Because only when the performance ends can you start building a life that fits your soul. So if you've made it this far, reading, feeling, breathing this in, you've already begun. And the next time you catch yourself pretending to be okay, remember, you don't have to. Not anymore.